I'm sorry, but I don't kind of see the issue with Iran. I really don't.
I think it is important that we maintain military budgets and military action when it is needed.
All the things we need, oh, well, Iran gets to cut in line.
The headlines that we see online all the time, like we're always just bombarded with bad news.
Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our National Conversation. The date today is June 22nd. My name is Sam Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Our National Conversation. And of course, we're going to be discussing today different perspectives and narratives on the recent bombings of Iran, what the Trump administration is saying, what criticisms of the Trump administration are saying. And we're just really going to kind of dive into this topic. I have two guests with me here today. We have Joseph, who is on the policy, sorry, not the policy content writers. I was thinking about Masie there for a moment. You are on the social media team. And then we have Masie, who is our kind of director of policy content and strategy, and also our managing editor. If people have seen Connor before on a previous podcast, Masie's just stepping into Connor's position. He has to focus on a PhD program right now, but hopefully we'll have him back in a future episode. Anyways, guys, obviously we have this crazy development here. I was going into this podcast when we were initially prepping, thinking, okay, we have some leeway here. We're gonna have 2 weeks of kind of diplomacy between Iran and Israel, maybe mediated a little bit by the U.S., and we can really just kind of take our time diving into the implications, all that. But nope, we actually got strikes against Iranians' nuclear facilities by the U.S. And supported by Israel there. So there's a lot to get into here, a lot of information we don't know as of recording this podcast, so I imagine some of this will be outdated. So really all this is going to be is just a snapshot. What are people thinking right now? What are different sides saying? And why do they believe what they believe? So let's start with both of you guys. Masie, we'll go ahead and start with you. Thoughts on the recent strikes? What are you thinking? Kind of what are you believing? What narratives are you buying into, and why?
Yeah, I don't know if this was, totally unexpected that America would retaliate against Iran. I mean, we know that Israel and Iran are, constantly at odds. So there have been not just weeks of tension, there's pretty much always been tension, especially over there in the Middle East. But the drone strikes or, the attacks on the nuclear facilities, it wasn't totally out of the blue, but just the day before, President Trump was saying that he didn't really know what he was going to do, and he didn't really he didn't even figure it out before, and then the very next day we get these drone strikes, and it does sort of come out of the blue, but um, I think this is something that liberals and conservatives can agree on because I don't think America wants to go to war. I don't think they want to further this conflict. Um, I think that's probably one of the silver linings to come out of this is that we can all finally agree on something. Um, but yeah, I think I mean, we could probably cut that, right?
Mhm.
Later.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, well you bring up a few points there, Maisie, that I want to dig into there just a little bit. So the first is uh maybe you can help me kind of understand this a little bit more. You were saying how this both seems out of the blue, but also just given the nature of the situation, the tensions that exist and so forth, the wider context here, maybe it's not as out of the blue as it seems in the moment. And two, maybe this is a uniting factor for Americans across the partisan divide. You know, conservatives, progressives, we can agree we don't want to go to war. I mean, Trump kind of campaigned on this promise, right? Let's not get dragged into another war in the Middle East. I'm not going to initiate any wars. I'm not going to, get us into any existing wars, things like that. And so seems like the MAGA crowd, or a sizable portion of it, and most progressives reacting to the situation can really have kind of the same opinion there. Is that sort of the point that you're making?
Yeah, and I'm not a complete expert on the entire history of the Middle East because I feel like we could sit here and talk about it forever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think Trump did campaign on that promise to his followers that he wouldn't get dragged into a war, that he would end conflict and, just kind of make America a stronger presence. Um, Not just nuke people the very next day. And I feel like in the context of his presidency right now, it was a bit shocking to hear that he had done that, not because not because he cares about what we think about him as a president, um, but because I would have thought there would be a little more deliberation in the topic. I mean, like I said, we probably knew for weeks that something was going to happen, but it kind of did seem out of the blue. And sorry, I had a thought there and now it's gone.
That's okay. We
Um,
can return.
we can cut that in post because we
Yep,
love
yep.
post.
There you go. We love post. All right. Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Thank you for presenting that perspective there, Maisie. A few things really quickly before we turn to Joseph. I First of all, in terms of kind of the out of the blue and how sporadic, this might have been, I I think that you're right. It does, in some respects, seem out of the blue, maybe not as much in the wider context. But one thing that we do know, at least from press conferences and just the nature of the military operation that was used here, is there had to have been at least a few weeks of planning and kind of
Hmm.
preparation in order to make this work. There were actually kind of decoy jets, sent over the Pacific. There were military leaks that were
Hmm.
intentional to let the Iranians know, hey, no, these planes are actually going to be flying over here. And then they snuck a few planes over across the Atlantic to go and bomb these targets in Iran.
Hmm.
There were missiles or some sort of munitions. I can't remember the details. Not a military weapons expert. Fired from submarines. Um, so there
Wow.
was a fair bit here, and I, you know, I imagine that tells us that this wasn't an instance of Trump just being like completely erratic and, you know
Hmm.
what, 2 weeks of diplomacy, we're good. Oh no, shoot, press the button. I want to bomb Iran now.
Right.
I think that, there was probably a great deal of rhetorical deception here. Now maybe
Hmm.
that means this is more concerning or less concerning. I don't know. We can dig into that more. But that's just a thought that kind of came to mind as you were talking there, Maisie. Um, and the second thing I want to bring up and get kind of your guys' reaction to is the administration, or at least JD Vance, have been really quite adamant that this isn't the U.S. getting into a war. That all this is sort of just a kind of more precise targeting of certain facilities. It's just to send that message and basically eradicate or get closer to eradicating Iran's nuclear capabilities. And it's not to be followed by further military action unless Iran starts hitting U.S. stuff. Now, whether one buys that, how you define a war, that's up to you guys. But that is an argument that is being made. So I'm curious as to your guys' reactions to that. Joseph, let's kind of go to you. What are you thinking about this whole issue? What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Yeah, it's the classic loophole, right? He's like, "Oh, I don't need Congress's permission if it's a special military operation," right? So I think that's the loophole that they use to invade sovereign countries or threaten their sovereignty. I'm not a fan of this conflict. I don't think that we should be joining, proxy wars on the behest of another foreign country. Not a big fan. I am what makes me I know what you said earlier is we don't want to escalate things further, right? And it makes me wonder, how will Iran retaliate? Like you said, are they gonna go towards military assets, or are they gonna go towards our oil over there? Are they gonna stop the flow of oil? Or will they just kind of do nothing, like when Trump, I believe in his first administration, he killed one of their political leaders, a guy by the name of Soleimani, I believe.
Hmm.
And Iran Iran uh Iran always has kind of the reputation of being a paper tiger. You know, they it is not a good idea to, sorry, that's my cat causing a ruckus there.
Oh, you're
It,
good.
uh,
as they
his name
do.
is Stinky, by the way. It's very funny.
Nice.
Anyway, but back to my point. Iran can be a paper tiger, but I just don't think that we should be continuing these conflicts that we don't need to be in. I know that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, he has been advocating for a conflict with Iran for the past 30 years. You know, he's saying, "Oh my God, it's happening tomorrow, guys. I'm serious this time. I
Hmm.
promise." So it is definitely a manufactured campaign, and I just don't want the US to do this. I'm sorry, but I don't kind of see the issue with Iran. I really don't, because my main focus would be on Americans. I don't think that the housing crisis is caused by Iran. I don't think my mass homelessness is caused by Iran. I don't think me going bankrupt if I have to go through a medical procedure without insurance is Iran's fault. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be filing Chapter 11, and I'm gonna be like, "Oh, damn you, Ayatollah." So no, I think Americans should really focus on this. And I think it's kind of a shame that my tax dollars is not going on fixing these dang potholes here in Los Angeles, versus, oh yeah, let me have another politician sign a missile to go into some, to some poor village over there. So no, I'm not a big fan. I don't think we should be here. And yeah, I also agree that this wasn't random, like you said. It wasn't. I don't believe it was random either. You did have Trump playing kind of coy. He's saying like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know."
Hmm.
You know, so no, it definitely was planned. There must I do not think that it is as erratic as it can be. I do think that they weigh their options. I think they weigh, oh man, are the lives of U.S. soldiers there if they attack a base, or will they attack my precious oil? So yeah,
Hmm.
I'm not a fan
It's
of
all
this
about
decision.
money.
Oh, of course it is.
Yeah. I kind of just want to go back for a second, and I didn't mean that it was like completely like out of the blue. Like I know he can't just snap his fingers and
Mhm.
blow up things. I just mean like in the public eye, like to all of
Oh, yeah.
us, like these headlines
Mhm.
just started really generating through. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, definitely there's definitely planning involved in this sort of military action.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think you're right in terms of the sporadic nature of just the public awareness of this sort of thing. Like all of a sudden we're doing this, and I suppose that's just kind of the nature of things with military operations, to this effect. Obviously, you can't broadcast what you're going to do there, but yeah, I think it does contribute to just that hectic mindset, that the American people are lodged in due to our media ecosystem and just everything
Yeah.
that's going on right now, deception in terms of rhetoric, what leaders say they're doing, and they're actually doing something else, things like that. But I want to get into a few things there that Joseph mentioned. That I know there's a lot of people there who would agree with, a lot of people who would very strongly disagree with a few points there that you made, Joseph. So let's dive into that a little more. The first thing that I want to talk about is sort of whether Iran presents a geostrategic issue and the U.S. has a legitimate interest, at least potentially, in carrying out military strikes against Iran, right? So let's just assume, for the sake of argument, maybe this is completely false, maybe it's made up, maybe it's smoke and screen to do something else. But let's just assume that Iran did have a pretty robust nuclear weapons program. It was getting pretty close to armament, or there were concerning signs. Because obviously they have a nuclear energy program, right? That's permitted under the non-proliferation treaty. And I think maybe this feeds a little bit into what Netanyahu's been saying for 30 years. You know, if I want to interpret him a little more charitably as opposed to just a crazy guy who really wants to bomb Iran for no reason, which is possible, but um, it seems to me that based on what I've read so far, if you have a sufficiently robust nuclear energy program, then you're always kind of close potentially to that threshold, right? You can always kind of re-equip that or manipulate the materials or divert resources in such a way to where you can get pretty close to and or gain a nuclear weapon. So maybe that's kind of feeding into this perception, and maybe it kind of oscillates. They're close 1 year, or they're not, or there's not weapons inspections, working properly, so we don't know, but it's a huge risk, all of that stuff. Um, but kind of barring all of that, just assuming for whatever reason, recently they were really close and there were signs that they were going to attain a nuclear weapon. Do you think that if that intelligence exists and is true, that it is justified for the United States to carry out an armed strike on Iran's nuclear facilities to kind of prevent that proliferation? Is that justified, or is that still a waste of taxpayer dollars and we really shouldn't care about whether Iran has nukes or not? So we'll go to Joseph because you brought this up, and then I do want to hear Maisie's thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so in my true, honest to God opinion, it is a sovereign country. I am not worried about what they are doing. I am worried about what we're doing. So I'm just not interested in uh in international politics like that. I don't really see the harm of why they choose to enrich uranium or not. But we talked about that in this scenario if they do have them. But my opinion is I kind of see it like this. It's a joke. Oh, we need to invade Iran because they have nukes. Oh my God. Well, why don't we invade Russia? Are you crazy? They have nukes. So, so I think I don't believe that this is that important. I kind of don't. It is a sovereign nation, and I kind of don't think that it's that it's worth it going through an endless $1 trillion war once again for a hypothetical. And if they do have one, so what? Like literally, so what? We have hundreds of nukes. Israel has hundreds of nukes. China and Russia have hundreds of nukes. I don't see how countries could choose to defend themselves by, enriching their own nuclear program. I kind of don't see what's the issue. Why do we need to be the world police? It's been a disaster for 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 years. So I don't see the issue with this. I'm sorry. I think me and the majority of Americans kind of don't care because I I'd rather our money go helping us instead of helping fuel endless wars through oil money, through giving a substantial military budget to other countries. I am I'm sorry, I just don't think it matters, no.
Well, thank you, Joseph, for your honesty there. There's a lot I want to dig into there, and some stuff that I think it'll be valuable to push back on to kind of dig into more. But at the very least, I appreciate your willingness to just kind of say honestly, I don't really understand why this is a major issue because I think in this discussion, there's kind of a tendency to just accept, okay, nuclear proliferation is a bad thing. That's our starting assumption. What do we do from there? Right. And that's kind of how these conversations begin. But maybe there's a lot of people, maybe even the majority of Americans, I haven't looked at polling data on this, who don't really see that as an issue and they're more concerned with other things. So I'd love to dive into that a little more. But before I do, I want to get Maisie's thoughts on this.
I mean, personally, I do think Americans should care about the fact of whether or not they have nuclear weapons and whether we maintain our status as the global police force. Just because if we aren't, then who will be? And with our country having such a high status and such a large military, having being one of the wealthiest countries in the world, um, I think it is important that we maintain military budgets and military action when it is needed. And Sam, you asked the question, if we knew that Iran did have a nuclear weapon or had made progress towards their nuclear facilities, would it still be necessary, or would it be more reasonable? And I absolutely think it would be. I mean, if we did have that proof, which we don't have because they're actively like fencing it off from reporters and anybody who has questions about it, if we knew that they were making progress towards um, a nuclear weapon, it absolutely is important that we at least care and you know, maintain our status. We also need to stay informed about things like this. But that's just my personal stance. We absolutely need to be at least informed instead of just having a myopic view of America as it is now. Because I think a big part of people feeling blindsided about this, myself included, is that maybe we didn't pay attention to other headlines outside of the No Kings protest or whatever was happening within our borders. Maybe we should have been paying more attention to what was going on around the world, but sometimes we have sort of a shorter lens into what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah. So the kind of the second point there is maybe Americans are too sometimes too focused on domestic issues. Whereas Joseph brought up the point that, well, there's a lot of international stuff going on that really doesn't affect our everyday lives, and or at least not as tangibly or directly as a lot of these domestic issues. So we should divert more focus domestically. But then you're saying maybe the reverse is true to some extent. Maybe we're a little too focused on just whatever the domestic politics is, and we don't really follow the wider trends or really understand what's happening around the world, or why we maybe should care about that. Is that sort of the suggestion that you're making?
It is, and I do think it's a problem now with journalism is that they tend to follow the louder voices. Whatever headline is getting a lot of views, that's really what they're going to cover. I mean, it's all about clicks now, when I feel like journalistic integrity has sort of degraded in the last 15 or so years. But that's a whole another topic. We could talk about that for a long time.
Mm. Oh yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that sometime, just the state of our media ecosystem. But what I
Mhm.
really want to dig into right now is, it seems to me that we have a disagreement, something that we can just really dissect here. And that is, Joseph, you say, okay, even assuming that Iran has a nuclear weapon, which or at least was very close to having a nuclear weapon, right? They were right there, few days, few weeks, few months, or something like that. They would have one. We need to take out the nuclear facilities. Even if we assume that, your idea is, well, nuclear proliferation might not actually be that big of a deal. It's really not something that affects Americans' everyday lives all that much. And so it's maybe not something that we should be concerned about, or at the very least isn't something that we should be spending massive amounts of money, to sort of reduce through military interventions. And even if this doesn't end up being $1 trillion war or something like that, I'd imagine the military operation wasn't super cheap. Um, and then Mazie, you're making the point that, well, no, I think nuclear proliferation is kind of a big deal. And if, America and its allies, and even other countries, that are kind of part of enforcing the Non-Proliferation Pact and so forth, don't maintain this policing role and stop proliferation, that, it would be a bad thing, or at least a very uncertain thing. So I want to dig into first, Maisie, why you feel that way. Why you feel that if, say, we just stop caring about who has nukes, that it would be a problem. And then I want to get Joseph's thoughts on kind of digging into that a little more as well. So Maisie, why do you have that perception?
Um, well, I mean, I think it's important to note that I'm not advocating for like pointless wars. Like, I don't think this is the first time that I don't know, that the government has kind of led the American people into a conflict that turned out to be kind of pointless. I mean, like
Yeah.
Vietnam happened and so did Iraq, and that kind of led nowhere. Both of those did. Um, but yeah, I just think it's the nature of the world to like if America steps down voluntarily for one, voluntarily decides to stop being the global police force and just let everything happen. I mean, like how would the world look if we did that? I think it helps to like maintain our status as the global police force. It helps us to keep on top of things of what's going on in the world. I mean, we have other governments who are like have pretty sizable militaries and have sizable budgets. And um, I think given Iran's potentially, furthered nuclear weapon, given their proximity to so many other countries, especially in the Middle East, and also the potential alliances that they could make, that's just really concerning to me. So I think the bottom line isn't that I'm, always gunning for war or anything like that. It's just that if we're not in charge, like who is going to be in charge? And they're going to want us to follow in line and obey another country's orders or whatever. But it's just concerning to me, like surrounding the idea of our safety as well as maintaining a sort of ironic peace in the world. I mean, I know that right now there are several countries at war with each other, but am I hesitate to imagine what it would look like if we weren't there to sort of intervene sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, no, thank you for that perspective, Maisie. I feel like on both sides of the aisle, the sort of we might call this I don't know. I hear the word like neoconservatism quite a lot to sort of describe like what the Bush administration did with Iraq and sort of that sort of perspective of the American should be a kind of like heavily involved interventionist to some degree or another for the sake of our own security and things like that. And obviously, the Trump crowd has criticized that a lot. Progressives have criticized that a lot. But maybe our criticism can go a little too far, and maybe it's possible to overcorrect on something like that, and we can neglect the importance of American involvement or the potential of it, to some degree, and maybe it's about finding a sort of balance there.
Mm,
So yeah, that's a possibility. I thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
Joseph.
absolutely. There could be
Mhm.
like some kind of like middle ground.
Oh yeah, yeah. Joseph, what are your thoughts on this? And how would you, if you want to dig into a little more fully, like what do you think the world is going to look like if like not just the United States, but say the UN and just a bunch of countries, all the countries that have nukes and so forth, they just stop caring about who has nukes, and pretty much everyone can get nukes who can afford them. Do you feel like this is going to be a like why do you think this won't be kind of a major problem? What might you say to someone like Maisie who feels that no, that this seems kind of unstable and this seems like it could harm, American safety and start to have tangible effects. We just aren't feeling those effects right now because we heavily monitor proliferation and things like that. So, what are you thinking?
Oh no, I completely understand that mindset. Like if anybody's gonna be in charge, why shouldn't it be us then? I totally understand. I totally understand the of because nobody wants to swing up. That you will be completely obliterated if you mess with the U.S. Of course, I completely understand that. I know that the U.S. dominates virtually everything. They have their toes in everybody's punch bowl. So that's why America's at is where it's at. It is number one is because it does do that to everyone around them. So I completely get that. And there is a definite safety by being, the guy on top. 100%. Nobody wants to swing at the champ. Good luck if you do. Right? So I completely understand that. And so saying that why should we now what was the other part of your question? That why should we
Yeah, like why?
not care?
Yeah, like
Or
if we just going back to our original assumption, right? If we just assume that yes, Iran almost had a nuclear weapon there, and if we didn't go through with these bombings, then Iran would have had it, right? Um, I just want to kind of dig into your perspective a little more. That's, say, okay, well, we don't go through with the bombings in that case. Iran gets a nuclear weapon. Maybe we aren't as committed to non-proliferation in general. A bunch of other countries get these weapons. What do you think the world would look like then? And why would you say that that's not really something the American people should be all that concerned with. That maybe it's something overblown and it's become a dogma in foreign policy that maybe just isn't useful.
Oh, well, that was just my personal opinion that I wish we would focus on something else, on focused on domestic issues. But I totally, in your scenario, then that would be a sort of Cold War type of a Cold War type of feeling where everyone's afraid that everyone has nukes and you know, but that would kind of be I struggle to find what would be the point of that. Like if you threaten someone with nukes and you threaten someone else with two guys are fighting with nukes, then there will be mutually assured destruction and it would just be, you know, the end, right? It would be like we're playing Fallout. So no, that's that's I know that it's not I understand it's to keep America on top and but my whole point is just my own personal opinion that I wish we would focus on domestic issues. I feel like America also treats its citizens the same way as they treat other countries, in a sort of in a dominating way, like you see in our, like it was brought up earlier, like the immigration no kings protest and, of course the militarization of the police force, bringing in the National Guard without the governor's permission here in California. So it definitely reflects on its attitudes of how they act internationally. And honestly, it's probably worse on these poor people over there in the Middle East of just getting smashed and rolled and everything. But no, look, like I understand the need for it, and it's the results. Like I said, America is on top. America is the big cheese. So no, nobody's gonna make a bigger mousetrap to get us. But no, nah, that was just my personal opinion. I just found it to be
Mhm.
frustrating. Of like, oh, all the things we need. Oh, well, Iran gets to cut in line. So,
Mhm.
so no. Yeah, that's my view on it.
Okay, okay. So let me just kind of ask a follow-up here to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, because there's something that I don't know, it just hasn't clicked in my mind quite yet. Would you say that um, what the Trump administration just did, assuming Iran almost did have a nuclear weapon, that was justified, but it's unfortunate because it's taking attention away from domestic issues that, on the whole, are more important, and we should turn our media attention back to these domestic issues as soon as possible and resolve the situation diplomatically insofar as it's feasible. But at the time, maybe it was necessary, assuming they were close to getting a nuclear weapon, because it's in America's security interests and so forth. Is that the perspective that you're offering, or have I described that incorrectly?
I don't think I would still support that. Um, I think it's another one of like, oh, that he bypassed Congress, because it's a special military operation. But
Mm,
I'm not gonna pretend like I would support it, even though if he had congressional approval, which he'll probably get, honestly. But so
okay.
so there's that. I think it just again it is a if they truly had nukes and that we striked them, was that a good thing? It's still violating another country's sovereignty. And I just don't see, I get a bad taste in my mouth because it is just joining another country's beef with each other. So I just don't like it. I don't think it's needed. And honestly, I kind of don't really, obviously they do have a nuclear program, but I am just not motivated to continue this.
Okay.
That's just not my thing.
Okay. So just one word then. Would you say United States as a policy should just stop with any intervention to prevent nuclear proliferation, and that we should just focus on other things? That's the stance, right?
Oh, that would be lovely. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad we could clarify this. Because I still think that there's a lot to get into there, and I still think there's really I don't know, we could just talk about this for hours and kind of go back and forth, but I don't know, I just think it's an interesting perspective, Joseph, because it's just not something that I've heard much, in sort of like the foreign policy world, reading articles and so forth. It's just kind of I don't know. It's just kind of started as the central dogma, maybe we could say, or guiding assumption: proliferation is bad. Um, or at the very least, steps to reduce proliferation are generally justified. Things like that. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting perspective that you've brought up here. I was going to say something else. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, one other thing here to note, just on this proliferation issue before we move on. Unless Maisie, you want to say anything else on this topic. Um, but
I kind of do want to add something.
okay, yeah, awesome. I'll get to you in just 1 second. Just
Oh,
one
sorry.
quick note here. Um, I think that at least if we're approaching this like just with a broader perspective outside of the US, I think one point to make on the proliferation issue is maybe it's not so much about the US just wanting to maintain its spot as the top dog, right? Or its global hegemony or whatever else. Because then, well, why does the UK care about non-proliferation? Or, even maybe Russia has some stake in non-proliferation and so forth, right? Um, I think maybe part of the reason and part of the justification among foreign policy experts in general is, well, if we the more nukes we have, the greater the chances are for some sort of miscalculation, miscommunication, or error that then results in a huge catastrophe. And so maybe just that alone is sort of enough motivation to attempt to quell nonproliferation. And maybe these sorts of military interventions, if they are targeted and specific enough, like the one we had recently, maybe they could still be justified and wouldn't amount to a huge military cost. But maybe not. I mean, one thing that's pointed out time and again about Trump's recent actions is it was a huge gamble, and this might end up creating a much larger conflict that's going to be a lot more expensive and cost a lot more in terms of human life. So there's still more to dig into there, but I just thought I'd present that as sort of an alternative articulation of why we might want to stop countries from, engaging in proliferation. Maybe that argument itself doesn't work, and we can dig into that more if we have time. But Maisie, what did you want to add?
I guess I just wanted to present the thought that the American economic system extends our borders, like extends beyond our borders, is what I mean to say.
Mm,
Like, by, I guess, ceasing military action altogether outside of our own business, I guess, some would say, um, it absolutely has a lot to do with the economic system within our borders. I mean, inflation, like the national debt, all of those things. Like our country kind of runs on debt, one would say. So if, let's say, we cease military action, we stop proving ourselves, we stop intervening, um, how do you guys think other countries would see America? Like, do you think we would still have the privileges that we do? Like, I guess, like, let's think back. I guess Sam and I were talking about the gold standard a little bit back, but let's just say like um I don't know, we stop intervening and they call our bluff again, and oh, we can't cover any of the debt, we can't, even protect ourselves because we don't act militarily. I mean, do you guys still think we would be at the top of the totem pole? Do you guys still think we would, I don't, be able to protect these families in other countries that we were talking about earlier in the podcast that are being ravaged by their own governments? I mean, there are a lot of things that we wouldn't be able to do if we weren't the global top dog, so to speak.
yeah, that's. I mean, I think that's definitely true, Maisie, and a few things to dig into there. I think the first is maybe we can develop some sense of what this would look like in just talking about like Trump's, economic and foreign policy as a whole, with the tariffs and everything, and sort of disengaging from a number of alliances, etc. Um, and so maybe I don't know. I'd imagine there would be some substantial economic effects at the very least. And certainly if we're not engaging in military interventions, then any humanitarian issues that we would want to correct through those military interventions, we wouldn't be correcting. Now I'm skeptical I think a lot of people are, of the effectiveness of military interventions to correct like humanitarian issues, and we can think about the situation in Iraq, right? Super oppressive government. We go in there, try to establish a democracy, and it's really not that much better afterwards. So I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said for a kind of balanced policy here or very selective military interventions. I'm not sure. But yeah, at the very least, I think it would look a whole heck of a lot different. Joseph, what are your thoughts?
No, I totally understand the need to be dominant, of course, because how else are we gonna have all of the what makes the good parts of America is what we have is because we're so strong. But I'm sort of in the mindset of like, oh, our grand kingdom is not set on top of clouds. It's set on a mountain of skulls. So I kind of don't see that. But again, I understand it though. I understand that yes, we should again have our tolls in everybody's punch bowls because we get to drink it all. We get to have everything. We get to again be the top dog. So I think that's I understand why it's there. I understand why we're the ones. But what would happen if we stop? Well, of course, someone will probably. I'm not saying that I don't understand why this is happening. I'm just saying that it's blood money. I understand that we are very interventionist in virtually every country on the planet,
Hmm.
and we gain something out of it. Again, if we're the ones on top, then we're eating good, right? So I'm just more concerned about if we're the guys on top, then why does it also suck here? Why is there no free healthcare? Why are there no pot? Why are the potholes not fixed? Why does you know? Why does just why are the countries that we support all have free healthcare? Why do they have free education? Why is everything great everywhere else in Western countries? It
Hmm.
is great everything great everywhere else, but here you are called a filthy dirty commie if you just say, "Hey, I don't think I should pay like $700 for an ambulance." So no, I again, I am more concerned about domestic issues, but I am not going to pretend that I don't understand why we are interventionist everywhere else.
Hmm. So you understand it, Joseph, but you disagree with it, right? That's the
Yeah, because
sort of
blood money.
distinction there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think on each of those points there, obviously we could have like a huge discussion and get into like, is everything really bad here in the United States, or is it really better in the Nordic countries? Or if it is better, why is it better? Could we implement the same thing in the United States? Things like that. I'd love to have a thorough discussion on each of those points, but at the very least, I think a
Hmm.
plausible case can be made for everything that you just said there, Joseph. So what I'm curious about then, just to kind of end off this podcast because we're running out of time. Um, I think Joseph, I kind of already understand where you stand here, but just to kind of maybe cap off the podcast, talking about solutions and the policy direction that the United States should take in your guys' opinions. Obviously, we're not policy experts here, but just given what you're thinking, what you believe, what should the United States policy look like, right? So we'll go to Joseph and then we'll go to Masie. Um, so Joseph, it sounds like what you're arguing is the United States should just, as almost a complete rule, abandon military interventions, throughout the world, and that, if we do engage in these sorts of things, it should be in incredibly exceptional circumstances. So we shouldn't really stop nuclear proliferation. We shouldn't attempt to correct, humanitarian disasters, things like that, and we shouldn't really, fight against in any direct fashion, authoritarian governments, etc. And maybe, just to draw on Maisie's point earlier, given how interconnected the global economy is, maybe we divert less focus to military interventions to protect our own economic well-being and just focus on domestic industry at home here. Maybe almost sort of like what the Trump administration has been arguing for in terms of the tariffs, bringing back certain raw material industries to the United States, et cetera. Like, is that what I've just presented your policy aim, what you would like to see implemented? Are there nuances you would add on to that? Anything I missed?
I honestly don't mind humanitarian interventions. I kind of like how China is helping parts of Africa of basically creating their own public transportation systems, investing in medical research. I don't mind that type of interventionist if it's humanitarian. I think that's great. I think it's dope, and I think it more should happen, honestly. And I am just against the intervention of bringing in our own drone strikes. I don't like any of that. I know I personally don't like it, but if the U.S. continues to sell arms, then I guess if you wanted to do it that way, if you really want to America to do its own by helping other countries like that, I guess if you want to continue to sell arms, which we do, then I guess, but I still don't feel like our hands are completely washed because of that. It's kind of like how, Israel's genocide over there. America is complicit because we do sell, all our arms to them and we do fund their genocide. So I think that's again, it's as far as hands off as you can be, but you're still, the blood splatter will still be on your face. But I don't know. I am aware that it's not going to happen. Of course, I am aware that maybe I sound like I'm saying utopian views, and I don't mean to be the morality police, but I just think that we should, the in his second campaign, on Trump's second campaign, when he ran for president against Kamala. I'm sorry. So his third campaign when he ran against Kamala, he talked about being anti-war. He talked about being isolationist. He talked about focusing on America itself. And I just want to say, where are those guys at now? He campaigned on being anti-war. He's the anti-war president, and here he is now. I just don't. I'm not liking how things are going. No.
Hmm. All right. Okay. Maisie, thoughts on kind of the same question. What should the general policy aims of the United States be? Um, would you respond to anything that Joseph said there, or build off of it, or counter it in any way? Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate both of you for just having this conversation, and I appreciate Joseph. I appreciate talking with you guys because I feel like this doesn't really happen often, just with people our age. Um, but I guess I want to say that a lot of people think that they can only operate in absolutes, not to quote Star Wars, but anyway, they think that they can only agree with one or the other extreme, and there are a lot of people caught in the middle, believing in gray areas, and obviously there is a right and there is a wrong. But I think when it's difficult, I don't know, I guess to elaborate on, the exact motives and the exact, things behind the scenes, it can be hard to decide what is the right thing to do, especially in this case with Iran. I mean, I'm not an expert on anything. We're just three people talking.
Mm,
But I think bottom line, a lot of people think they have to agree with one side or the other when a lot of us are actually caught in the middle and don't want to go to war with Iran. I mean, conservatives might be construed as, warmongering or, liberals the opposite, has been the case for forever. But anyway, that's just how I feel about how the US can react. But I guess on this issue specifically, I think people are a lot more worried about it than they should be. I think I need to see proof before I get any more stressed than I already am as somebody my age. I mean, I was talking on the phone with my sister today, and she's talking about completing her passport and how she's going to move out of the country and all this. And I think a lot of this um, can be attributed to the headlines that we see online all the time. Like, we're always just bombarded with bad news, especially in this case. I mean, every headline's already calling it a war when it's not even that. It's just a response to a conflict. We're not at war yet. No war has been declared, right? Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, well, I think this is part of the controversy. I think certainly the Trump administration would say, or at the very least, the administration as a whole, Trump might say something else entirely. He has a tendency to do that. But I think they generally say, no, this isn't a war. We struck their nuclear capabilities because we had reason to believe that they were very, very close to achieving a nuclear weapon. We wanted to get rid of that possibility. So, we targeted that, did a single mission, and now there's not going to be any more military response unless Iran strikes back. So I think there's two ways you can look at this. Either you can define war in such a way that this is a war now, um, or you can say, no, this isn't a war, but it's a very risky move because if Iran does retaliate, and they've said they would, then that is going to lead the U.S., as the Trump administration has said, to then retaliate further. And once you start getting in that situation, then you can probably call this a war or something very, very similar. I suppose maybe it depends on the magnitude or the duration. I'm not sure. There are I'm sure a gazillion different definitions of war. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
international law has kind of the closest definitive answer, and it could define that in some way. But yeah, I'd say that's part of the major controversy here. Is this a war, or is this a move that is likely going to lead to a war? Um, and yeah, I suppose we'll just kind of have to wait to see. But I think you make a good point there, Maisie, that it's so easy in our media environment to overplay things and to think that the world is on fire and everything's burning, everything's
Mm-hmm.
terrible, everyone's dying. When really, throughout most of the world is just kind of boring and
Mm-hmm.
always is. Um, and so maybe we just have to remember that a little more, not to discount or downplay, the significant policy issues or the people that are suffering or the security threats, whatever else, however we want to frame things. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's very easy to overblow.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to keep your peace of mind, it helps to, stay informed and not
Mhm.
let mere headlines define how stressed you are on things. So it helps to do your own research, I think, to kind of like look within the diction of an article and separate the facts from the opinions. And yeah, I guess on this, I'm not necessarily worried as of yet. I mean, something could have happened during this podcast that we're filming, and
Yeah.
my opinion could change. And also, I am a person, people have the ability to change their opinions. So,
Mhm.
I mean, as long as we're accepting of that, as a generation and as a whole, I feel like we'll be better off in the realm of being able to talk to each other. Um, but yeah, I guess I want to see proof. Pixar didn't happen. Like, do they actually have a nuclear weapon, or have they just been saying that for the last 35 years? Which
Mhm.
they have.
No. Or
So,
have they been close to getting one? Or was this a false alarm? Has this been fabricated in some way, or were they actually, because a lot of what we talked about in this discussion is just contingent on that information. Was the intel correct? Was there intel?
right. And you're right, it is contingent on the information. Like, I think a lot of us are sort of just like either, like my sister, like planning on leaving the country if World War III potentially happens, like, but she was saying that today, and there's no indication of like a huge war about to erupt tomorrow. But I feel
Yeah.
like people are either like her, or they're just kind of like, well, I guess we'll see. I mean, crazier things have happened, and we don't really have any proof. So I guess we'll just see
Mhm.
what we're dragged into. Because I
Yeah.
don't, like we were saying, like, I think most of us can agree that this isn't something that we want to be involved in. even MAGA supporters. I mean, like
Oh yeah.
they, I mean, if
That
you
that was
go
one
on
of the kind of the
Trump's
biggest campaign points in Trump's
right,
campaign.
right, like not getting involved in a lot of like foreign conflicts, and I mean, he even pointed to other ones that Biden might have gotten us into or whatever. And anyway, um, yeah, I think even MAGA supporters right now are really angry, not just disappointed, but angry. I mean, if you went into Trump's comment section on Instagram like a week ago, they're all like, "Yes, my president, protecting US," whatever, as every president's Instagram comment section looks like for the most part. Um, if you went in there a week ago, that's what it looked like. And then yesterday, it's just full of like comments that are just admonishing him for his decision to get involved with Iran. And I just think the stark contrast is really like amazing because for a long time it seemed that like Trump could literally do anything and MAGA supporters would be all for it. Like it seemed like kind of toxic support, I guess.
Mhm.
So it was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of refreshing to see that people can think for themselves, I
Yeah.
guess, in the comments section. So I have faith. I'm not stressed yet, but I'm playing it by ear like everybody
Hmm.
else.
Yep. Yep. No, definitely. Yeah, and I think it is always useful to see things like that and just, to maybe stop seeing the other side or other sides as just, manipulated machines. Like these are people with opinions, and hopefully those opinions are fairly
Exactly.
stable. Or if they aren't stable, they're changing in light of like critical thought and so forth,
Hmm.
as opposed to just whatever, XYZ leaders say.
Hmm.
Um, but we're running out of time here. So I just want to thank you both for coming on, for sharing your perspectives on this issue, for letting me kind of dig into them a little bit and just try to understand why you believe, what you're thinking. And yeah, let's just play it by ear and see what happens with the rest of the story. Obviously, most of the information we talked about is going to be completely outdated by the time this podcast is published, but hopefully the conversation itself is useful irrespective of all the little developments
Hmm.
in terms of the info we get, what satellites say, things like that.
Yeah,
But
and
thank you again.
we're continuing the conversation on our website also. Like we'll
Oh,
have some
yes.
pieces out with updates and everything.
Oh, very, very good. Yeah, so that's our nationalconversation.org, right?
Hmm.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, yeah, if anyone wants to go there, kind of visit, comment on the pieces, if you want to comment on this podcast as well, your thoughts on the conversation, your thoughts on the topic, how we might improve things, please do. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. And thank you again, Joseph and Masie.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.